They wanted to teach her an even bigger lesson. They began taking off their trousers, intending to rape Abigail right there in the basement. "Take off your clothes," they ordered. Abigail pleaded desperately, begging them not to do what they were about to do, but they ignored her. "Take off your nose mask," Femi demanded. "I want to see the look on your face as I abuse you." For the first time, Abigail's eyes filled with terror and fear. "Please don't make me take off my nose mask," she begged, her voice trembling. But the boys ignored her. The evening sun painted the sky a deep, menacing red as Ruth, heavily pregnant and clad in tattered rags, fled the village. Her feet pounded the dirt, the sharp stones cutting into her soles as the furious shouts of angry men echoed behind her. "Stop, Ruth!" they bellowed, hurling stones that narrowly missed her. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. With every ounce of strength left in her failing body, Ruth plunged into the dense, shadowy forest, branches clawing at her skin as she fought her way through. At last, Ruth emerged onto a desolate road, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest behind her seemed to hold its breath, the angry voices fading into the distance. But her ordeal was far from over. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold, hard ground. There, under the dying light of day, Ruth forced the baby out of her womb, her screams of pain swallowed by the emptiness of the road. It was a baby girl. Ruth cradled her newborn, her trembling hands barely able to hold the tiny life she'd just brought into the world. Tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face as she gazed at the child. "No one can harm you now," she whispered, her voice frail but resolute. And with those final words, Ruth's strength gave out. Her head slumped forward, and her lifeless body stilled. When the men from the village finally arrived, they found Ruth dead, her baby crying weakly beside her. They stared at the scene, their faces void of pity. "We must take her body back," the leader commanded, urgency in his tone. "The rites must be performed before sunset." Two men bent to lift Ruth's corpse, their movements hurried and mechanical. "What about the baby?" one of them asked hesitantly, glancing at the tiny figure on the ground. The leader's face twisted in anger as he turned toward the sleeping infant. "The child should be dead, but we cannot kill it. Leave it here. The spirit of death will take care of the rest." Without another word, the men marched back into the forest, taking Ruth's lifeless body with them. The baby girl, fragile and helpless, lay on the cold ground, her cries piercing the night. No one cared that she was only a newborn, struggling to survive her first hours of life. But against all odds, she clung to life. As the night deepened, a pair of headlights appeared on the horizon, slicing through the darkness. The car screeched to a halt. Mrs. Coleman, a woman in her late 40s, stepped out, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she heard the cries. She hurried out of her car and froze at the sight of the abandoned baby. Her heart clenched as she picked up the tiny, frail body. The child's skin was icy to the touch, her breaths shallow and weak. Tears filled Mrs. Coleman's eyes. "Who could do such a thing?" she whispered. Wasting no time, she rushed the baby to the nearest hospital. Doctors and nurses sprang into action, whisking the infant into the emergency room. Mrs. Coleman waited, pacing the hospital corridor through the long, agonizing night. By the next morning, the baby girl's breathing was fine again. As the doctors carried her, the baby smiled for the first time, as though she was happy to have been saved. The doctor and the nurse placed her to sleep. That morning, the doctor approached Mrs. Coleman with a tired smile. "She's stable now," he said. "She's a fighter." Relief washed over Mrs. Coleman as she entered the room where the baby slept peacefully. She gazed down at the tiny girl, her heart swelling with an inexplicable love. A blessing, she thought. A miracle child who had come into her life when she least expected it. But as she smiled down at the baby, a shadow of unease crept into her mind. Who was this child? Why had she been left to die on the roadside? And what secrets did her tiny frame conceal? The answers came sooner than Mrs. Coleman could have imagined. Barely 20 minutes later, the doctor who first cared for the baby dropped dead in his office, lifeless. Chaos erupted as the nurses too, who had witnessed the baby's first smile, also dropped dead, one after another. The hospital was thrown into turmoil, and whispers of a curse began to circulate. By the time Mrs. Coleman brought the baby home, she was no longer filled with unbridled joy. Fear gnawed at her as she sat in her living room, watching the infant sleep. The deaths haunted her. "What is wrong with this child?" she whispered to herself. "What kind of curse follows her?" She considered returning the baby to the roadside, leaving her to whatever fate awaited. But she couldn't. The bond she felt was too strong. She had fallen in love with the child from the moment she laid eyes on her. Mrs. Coleman made a decision that day. She would protect the baby, whom she named Abigail. She would shield her from the world and shield the world from her. Mrs. Coleman raised Abigail, the two of them living a quiet, happy, but secluded life. For 5 years, wearing a nose mask on Abigail had become a normal routine for Mrs. Coleman. She did not want Abigail running into someone at school and giving them a smile that would lead to their death. The nose mask was her way of protecting the world and protecting Abigail from a fatal, irreparable damage. Each morning, Mrs. Coleman would warn Abigail, "Never take off this mask, and under no circumstances should you smile at anyone." Abigail obeyed, her young mind accepting the strange rule as part of her reality. But the dark truth surrounding her birth and the curse she bore would not remain hidden forever. And when it finally surfaced, it would change their lives in ways neither could have foreseen. In kindergarten, life was easier for Abigail. Though as a child, she never understood the reason why she was different, and the even sadder reason why she had to always wear a nose mask and never smile at anyone. Despite this, Abigail was still a happy child who brought joy as much as she could to everyone around her. But at age 16, Abigail had spiraled into a world of her own. Things had grown different as she moved into high school. It wasn't the same as in kindergarten, where her peers didn't care about her oddities or the ever-present nose mask. Mrs. Coleman had just transferred Abigail to Victory High. Abigail had complained about the girls in her former school who used to mock her for always wearing a nose mask. The relentless torment had grown unbearable, forcing Mrs. Coleman to make the difficult decision to change schools. Now, as Mrs. Coleman and Abigail sat in the principal's office of the new school, the head teacher's voice was strong and reassuring. "Don't worry, Mrs. Coleman. Your daughter is in good hands. She is safe here. Our school does not condone bullying at all. We frown upon it, and I will personally ensure no one taunts your daughter," the head teacher promised with a confident smile. Mrs. Coleman felt a wave of relief, thanking the head teacher. That day, Mrs. Coleman hugged her daughter tightly and bade her farewell, encouraging her to be bold, strong, and unafraid of the world. As mother and daughter parted ways, Abigail walked back into the school, but as always, the stairs followed her as she made her way down the corridor to her class. Everyone stared at her as though something strange had entered their midst. Or was it all just in her mind? Abigail wondered as she stepped into the classroom. The class was crowded with bright and cheerful students, but Abigail's fears were confirmed when she realized she had sat on gum that Femi, the class bully, had planted on her seat to welcome her. Femi and his friend Maxwell burst into laughter, their mocking voices cutting through the room. "Welcome, weirdo," they sneered in unison. The other students turned their heads away, too afraid to intervene. Abigail's first day at school was nothing short of a disaster. That night, she couldn't sleep. But when Mrs. Coleman had asked about her day, Abigail lied, saying everything was fine. She didn't want to burden her mother with the stress of finding yet another school. Abigail was unaware, though, that worse things, beyond her wildest imagination, were on the horizon. Victory High School was home to Femi and Maxwell, the wealthiest and most feared boys in the school. Their reputation for cruelty was well known. Rumors of their bullying in their previous school were whispered among the students of Victory High, but no one dared to report them due to fear of their extremely wealthy and influential parents. Abigail tried her best to blend into the background, limiting her interactions with classmates who already found her odd. The girls often whispered cruelly about her, accusing her of wearing the mask to hide her bad breath. Though deeply hurt by their judgment, Abigail was undeterred. She knew her curse, and the last thing she wanted was to cause a tragedy. For a few weeks, Abigail's strategy of keeping to herself seemed to shield her from trouble. But that fragile peace shattered on a Friday during break time at the school's basketball court. "So you didn't do the assignment?" Femi's voice was filled with rage as he towered over Olu, a poor, orphaned scholarship student. Olu stood before Femi and Maxwell, his head bowed in shame. "I'm sorry," Olu stammered. "I've been ill and couldn't finish all 3 assignments." Maxwell scoffed. "So you want us to fail? That assignment is 50% of our test score. What were you thinking?" "I've always done your assignment since the term began," Olu pleaded. "Just this once, I couldn't. I'm really sorry." The malaria had drained Olu's strength, and standing under the scorching sun only made him weaker. But Femi and Maxwell were unmoved. "You're speaking French," Femi spat, his anger boiling over. "Today, you'll learn never to cross us." Olu lifted his eyes, fear etched on his face. "What are you going to do to me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Oh, don't worry," Maxwell replied with a sinister grin. "We're just going to teach you a lesson." The 2 boys dragged Olu to his locker. Ignoring his desperate pleas, they forced him inside and locked the door. Then they turned to leave, only to find Abigail standing in the corridor, her wide eyes betraying her shock. "What are you looking at, weirdo?" Femi shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Abigail scurried away, her heart pounding. She hadn't seen exactly what the boys had done, but she knew they were up to something. Perhaps they were stealing from Olu's locker, she thought, trying to convince herself as she hurried back to class to avoid confrontation. When break time ended, everyone returned to their seats. But Olu was missing, and Abigail noticed his absence. By Monday morning after the weekend, when school resumed, there was a frenzy at Victory High School. An ambulance was waiting outside, people ran helter-skelter, and the entire school reeked of a foul odor. Olu's dead body had been found inside his locker. His body had already begun to decay over the weekend, since Femi and Maxwell had forgotten to let him out before leaving school that Friday afternoon. Chaos engulfed the school that morning. In the school assembly, the head teacher's voice thundered with rage and pain. "It is nothing short of barbaric that a student in this school would carry out such a heinous crime against their own fellow student," she yelled, her voice trembling with fury. "The ones responsible for this will not go scot-free. Surrender yourself now, because I and the school will not stop until we find those who caused Olu's death. If anyone knows anything about this incident, please meet me in my office so we can avenge the innocent child whom the government placed in this school to study, not to meet his untimely end." Abigail, sitting in the crowd, sobbed quietly. She turned to Femi and Maxwell, who sat at a distance. Their guilt was palpable, written all over their faces. Abigail knew who was responsible for Olu's death, and she couldn't stay silent. If only she had known on that Friday that it had been Olu, a human being locked inside his locker, she wouldn't have walked away. Abigail blamed herself, tears trickling down her face. "I could have saved him," she muttered to herself. After the assembly ended, Abigail planned to see the head teacher on her return from visiting the police station. But during break time, Abigail was knocked unconscious, kidnapped, and dragged into the school's basement. When she opened her eyes, she found herself on the cold floor, with Femi and Maxwell towering over her. In their fear of being exposed, Femi and Maxwell had taken Abigail to the hidden basement to threaten her and instill fear so she wouldn't present herself as a witness to their unintentional crime. They screamed at Abigail and threatened her, claiming their wealthy parents had the power to frame her for the crime if she dared to report them. But Abigail was determined to expose them. Her defiance enraged the boys. "You think we're joking?" Femi spat. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." In their fury, they produced a hot iron and seared Abigail's skin, burning her legs. Abigail screamed in pain, begging them to stop, but they didn't listen. "This is just the beginning," Maxwell sneered. "By the time we're done with you, you'll be unrecognizable." The boys decided the scar wasn't enough. They wanted to teach her an even bigger lesson. They began taking off their trousers, intending to rape Abigail right there in the basement. "Take off your clothes," they ordered. Abigail pleaded desperately, begging them not to do what they were about to do, but they ignored her. "Take off your nose mask," Femi demanded. "I want to see the look on your face as I abuse you." For the first time, Abigail's eyes filled with terror and fear. "Please don't make me take off my nose mask," she begged, her voice trembling. But the boys ignored her. They forced Abigail to take off the mask, promising that they would leave if she did. Abigail begged and begged, telling them not to do it, but they promised to leave her alone only if she took off the mask. In tears, Abigail took off her nose mask for the first time. But as she pulled it off, Femi and Maxwell went on and began to rape her. Her screams filled the empty old basement, but no one could hear her. When the boys were done, they began to quickly dress back up. Abigail suddenly began to laugh and smile at them, her expression eerily calm. The boys hesitated, confused by her reaction. "Why is she smiling?" Maxwell whispered, unnerved. "Maybe she enjoyed it," Femi scoffed. Undeterred, they continued to dress up, feeling no remorse for what they had done, but unaware of what they had just unleashed. Their goal was to silence Abigail and crush her spirit. Femi and Maxwell hoped that by making her feel powerless and empty, she would fear them and never be able to speak up, and they thought they had succeeded. Leaving her broken and traumatized in the basement, both boys returned to class, confident their tracks were covered. But what would happen in the next few minutes would shake not just the school, but the entire city. Back in class, Femi and Maxwell settled into their seats, their smugness evident. The teacher walked in and separated the both of them to avoid their nuisance. The class lesson began, but Abigail was nowhere to be found. 5 minutes into the class, Femi suddenly dropped dead. The classroom erupted in chaos. Before anyone could process what had happened, Maxwell followed, collapsing lifelessly on his seat. The students screamed and fled the room in panic. An hour later, the news was buzzing. Reports of students found dead in lockers and others dropping dead in class had shaken the entire city. Victory High School was in turmoil. The head teacher vowed to uncover the truth as a crowd gathered outside the school gates, screaming and demanding answers. At home, Abigail sat in her mother's living room, trembling as she recounted everything that had happened. Mrs. Coleman held her, trying to console her distraught daughter. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Mrs. Coleman said firmly. "Those boys got what they deserved, but we can't let this curse continue. We need to find answers." That day, Mrs. Coleman and Abigail decided to return to the village where Abigail had been found. Mrs. Coleman was determined to uncover the truth and end the curse that had plagued her child. When they arrived at the village, Mrs. Coleman and Abigail immediately felt the weight of the villagers' stares. With eyes filled with suspicion and unease, as though ghosts from the past had returned to haunt them. Whispers spread like wildfire among the villagers, their presence causing a ripple of tension. Undeterred, they made their way directly to the chief priest's hut, the one man who held the answers they desperately sought. The chief priest, an elderly man with piercing eyes and a voice that carried the weight of authority, sat before them. He listened in silence as Mrs. Coleman explained why they had come. When she finished, the priest leaned forward, his voice heavy with foreboding as he began to recount the dark tale surrounding Abigail's birth. "Ruth," he began, "was a woman whose life took a tragic turn. Your mother, Abigail, killed her husband in self-defense. In a desperate act to escape his violence, she suffocated him to death using a pillow, or he would have beaten her to death, killing the child in her womb. But her husband, your father, he was no ordinary man. He was the only son of the village chief, the most powerful man in our village, and by our laws, that act was a grave taboo. The chief priest's gaze darkened as he continued, his voice trembling slightly with the memory. To punish her, the elders decreed that Ruth, already heavy with child, would be placed in the dark room. It is a sacred place where the spirit of death itself is summoned. Both Ruth and the unborn child were meant to die there. That was the will of the spirits. But Ruth, she did the impossible. Her will to save her child defied the spirit of death. She escaped the dark room, but death had already touched her. The spirit of death followed her, and it did not stop there. When Abigail was born, it latched onto her. Since that night, the spirit of death has walked with her, causing harm to anyone who comes too close. Mrs. Coleman clutched Abigail's hand, tears streaming down her face as the priest revealed the only way to break the curse. The spirit of death must be faced once more, he said gravely. The child must return to the dark room and stand judgment. If she is found innocent, the spirit will leave her forever. But if not, he let the ominous silence hang heavy in the air, refusing to finish the sentence. That night, the ritual was prepared. Abigail stood trembling before the evil hut, its entrance dark and foreboding. Mrs. Coleman held her tightly one last time, her prayers desperate and tearful. "You are my daughter," she whispered, "and you will survive this. God, the one I serve, will protect you." Abigail stepped inside the hut, the door slamming shut behind her. Mrs. Coleman fell to her knees outside, clutching her heart as she cried out in anguish. From inside the hut, horrifying screams and chilling wails erupted, as though the very air inside was alive with malevolence. The ground beneath them trembled, and the villagers watched from a distance, too terrified to approach. The screams continued through the night, the torment unrelenting. Mrs. Coleman could only pray, her voice hoarse as she begged God for her child's safety. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke over the village, the door of the hut creaked open. Abigail emerged, her steps shaky but steady, her face, no longer hidden behind a mask, shone with clarity and strength. She was alive, she was free. The chief priest stepped forward, his expression one of astonishment. "The spirit of death has judged her," he declared, his voice reverent. "She is innocent. The curse is broken." Mrs. Coleman rushed forward, wrapping Abigail in a tearful embrace. For the first time in 16 years, Abigail smiled, a radiant, beautiful smile, unburdened by fear. Later that day, they visited Ruth's grave, where Abigail knelt in silence. With a trembling hand, she laid a single flower on the ground. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for saving my life. I will never forget you." As they stood to leave, a soft, tender breeze brushed against them. It was as if Ruth's spirit had heard their words and was finally at peace. From that day forward, Abigail lived a normal life. No more masks, no more fear. She embraced her freedom and shared her beautiful smile with the world, a smile that no longer brought death but joy and hope. Back at Victory High, life slowly returned to normal. The truth of Femi and Maxwell's cruelty came to light, and the students vowed to end the cycle of bullying that had claimed Olu's life. A solemn remembrance ceremony was held in Olu's honor, as the school paid its final respects to the boy whose voice had been silenced too soon. Though Femi and Maxwell could no longer learn from their mistakes, their tragic end served as a cautionary tale, a haunting reminder of the consequences of cruelty and arrogance. Victory High became a school where love, kindness, and respect flourished. And as for Abigail, her story of survival and redemption became a beacon of hope. a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the unwavering will to overcome even the darkest of curses. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and share your thoughts on this story. Until we meet again, stay blessed and I'll see you in our next story.